Hi, everyone. We're going to go ahead and kick this off. Hello, my name is Maggie Schmidt, and I'm on the Global Partner Alliance team here at WWT, managing both our F5 and HashiCorp relationship. Today, we are going to have Tyler and Sean lead you through a hands-on workshop around integrating F5 BIG-IP and HashiCorp Vault and explore how these two solutions can be used for certification automation for web applications. Please do not hesitate to ask questions in the chat, and we will do our best to answer them real time or at the end of the presentation. Thank you all for joining today, and if you need to drop or want to hear this information again, a link to the recording will be sent as a follow-up. And with that, I will hand it off to Tyler.
Perfect, and thank you so much, Maggie. Let me bring up my screen right now. I'm hoping everybody can see it right now, but if not, let me know. But thank you so much, everybody, for hopping on our workshop today. As Maggie mentioned, what we're going to cover today is really a hands-on workshop focusing on integrating HashiCorp Vault with F5 BIG-IP. So how do we take these two amazing, great solutions, bring them together, and use them as a means of performing certificate rotation on our F5 BIG-IP devices, a very common use case that many organizations have today. But to kind of kick things off, what I want to do is just a really quick introduction. So for the folks that don't know me on this webinar today, my name is Tyler Hatton. I'm an automation consultant on our automation and orchestration consulting team. I think that's the name of our team. It just changed. But what I'm primarily focused on is really helping organizations move towards automation. Really taking those first steps and then figuring out how do you grow automation within your organization. And certainly something like certificate rotation when it comes to HashiCorp Vault and when it comes to F5 BIG-IP is a very common automation use case that I've seen in the field talking to many customers today. Sean, do you want to do a quick introduction of yourself?
Yeah, hi. My name is Sean Berry. I work on the Global Solutions Development Team as a network automation engineer. I'm here today to present the lab portion of the F5 certificate rotation with Vault. And I'm looking forward to answering any questions that anybody may have.
Perfect. Thank you, Sean. Appreciate the introduction. So between both of us today, what we're hoping, again, is just to give you kind of an introduction to this use case and get you familiar with how these two solutions can get brought together for certificate rotation. But kind of for a high-level agenda today and talk a little bit about just kind of what we're going to cover. So there's really 4 different goals, 4 different things that we want to talk about. The first thing that we want to talk about is kind of an introduction to the F5 automation tool chain. And what that is, and we'll cover this a little bit deeper in a second, it's just kind of a suite of solutions or plugins that you can use for your F5 BIG-IP to make the management of those devices easier for you and your organization. Then we'll talk a little bit about kind of the basics of HashiCorp Vault. I'm going to assume that most of the folks on this webinar today are somewhat unfamiliar with HashiCorp Vault. So just what I want to do is kind of a basic introduction of what is this solution, how does it work, what is the value that it can provide, and things kind of similar to that. And then the third thing that I want to cover is really just combining Vault with the HashiCorp toolchain. So again, how do we bring these two solutions together to create an automated solution focused on how you can rotate your certificates in your environment for your different F5 BIG-IP devices? And then finally, as Sean mentioned, and I mentioned earlier, we have a hands-on lab that actually goes through this specific use case. So what's really cool is not only are we going to talk about this use case, but we have a hands-on lab that you get to use later on to basically walk through this use case and hopefully give you some ideas on how you can implement it inside your own environment. But before we kind of go into the actual content and talk a little bit about the F5 automation toolchain and HashiCorp Vault, what I wanted to ensure is that everybody who's watching this right now has access to our lab environment. So I think we're going to drop the link in the chat, but the easiest way to get access to this lab environment is you're probably on a very similar page to the one that you're seeing right now, which is kind of crazy because you're seeing what you're seeing. Anyways, and it's delayed by a couple seconds. The easiest way that you can access this lab before we start going into this infinite loop where we're going to see Windows inside of Windows is right underneath the video screen where you're watching me right now. You'll see this resources section right here. If you want to access the lab and walk through it with us or walk through it with Sean later on, to access the lab, all you have to do is click this Access Lab link right here. And when you click on that link, what that will do is basically instantiate or stand up a unique instance of this Vault F5 Big IP lab for you. And then in order to get access to it, all you have to do is click on this Open in ATC Lab Gateway link right here. And what's really cool about this, and I always love demoing this, is it, again, basically drops you into your own unique lab environment that has Vault, that has your own F5 Big IP, that has all the infrastructure you need to basically walk through this demo. And it drops you into kind of a really cool jump box that's running Windows that's in front of us right now. So again, if you want to walk through the lab with us today, walk through it with Sean in in another 30 minutes or so, definitely launch this lab, take a look at it. Maybe you want to get a little bit ahead, you can do that too and go through the lab right now. Feel free, the lab is completely open up to you on how you want to use it. So it's a fantastic resource, but I just wanted to ensure that everybody's watching this right now can bring up that page and bring up the resource necessary to get access to that lab. That being said, maybe you're watching this video at a later date, or maybe you're watching it on YouTube, or somewhere that isn't on that event page that I just showed a second ago. Something else that you can do is if you go to that bottom link right there, www.link/vaultlab, what that will do is basically drop you into the page that gives you access to the lab. So all you have to do is basically click that launch lab link, and then it'll go through kind of the same process I showed you just a moment ago, where you can easily access that ATC Lab Gateway to run through the lab. So I just want to ensure anybody's watching this right now, you have hands-on access to this lab, where it's not just a lecture. We just want to ensure that you can go through these steps with us. So that's housekeeping out of the way. I'm sure you'll enjoy the lab later when Sean goes through it, but it's a great resource that we have. We not only get to talk about it, we can walk through it. So to kind of kick things off, what we thought we would first kind of talk a little bit about is really this thing called the F5 automation tool chain and its different integrations that exist out there. So as we talk about this integration with HashiCorp Vault in a couple minutes, really a key component in the way that Vault interacts with our F5 Big IP is through this F5 automation tool chain. And for the folks who are unfamiliar with what the F5 automation toolchain is, really what it's about is kind of a set of different plugins, integrations, kind of API endpoints that exist on the F5 device that makes the experience of automating and monitoring it easier for you and your organization. So it's probably 5 or 6 solutions right now. We're focused on just 4 of them right here. But the thing that really call out around these is they're completely free to you. You can install these plugins at any time for your F5 Big IP. They're freely available on GitHub. And then the final thing is they're completely open source, but they're also supported by F5. So when we talk about one of the integrations today around F5 AS3, the thing to call out is if you ever run into any problems with it and using AS3 and integrating it into the different solutions within your organization, it's completely supported by F5. It's not some random plugin that somebody wrote. You get free support from F5 on it, or you get as part of your paid support, I should say, from F5 for it. But the neat thing about really all these different solutions is you can integrate them with many of the common automation tools that are out there today. So later on, I'm going to show Vault and how it integrates with Vault, but you can, of course, integrate it with things like Terraform and Ansible, and I've done an integration with ServiceNow. All these are just different ways that you can integrate with this F5 automation toolchain to, again, kind of automate and monitor various aspects of your Big IP device. But ultimately, where this all comes into play and kind of where these different solutions that are part of this toolchain are focused on is, again, automating various parts of the F5 lifecycle. So how do you go from the process of maybe bootstrapping and standing up an F5 device, similar to what we're doing here with a cloud template, or maybe you're using a VCMP device and standing up a VCMP guest, or I don't know, maybe you're just spinning up an OVA in your VMware environment. How do you go from that really basic image, that base image that you're spinning up, and then configuring it in an automated workflow? And again, that's the whole point of the automation tool chain. So there's several different solutions that are part of it. Again, we're going to only focus on one of those today, but I think it's important to call out things like declarative onboardings. And what declarative onboarding is about is kind of the initial configurations of a Big IP device. So configuring things like a self IP in your routes and maybe the licensing of a Big IP. Declarative onboarding is focused on that. And then what we're going to focus on is kind of the configuration as code aspect of it, or the configuration management piece of a big IP. So you kind of your day two automation is sometimes what I call it. So the creation of your VIPs, your pools, your profiles. That's what we're going to integrate with Vault today, and that uses something called App Services 3, or often shortened to AS3, and that's also part of this automation tool chain that we're talking about right now, and that we'll focus on a little bit later. But finally, kind of the final piece of this automation tool chain is around monitoring and telemetry. So you've spun up these configurations, you spun up your big IP device. How do we pull data from this big IP device? Because it's collecting a lot of it and getting that into some third-party location or third-party store. That's what telemetry streaming is focused on. So how do we take kind of the decrypted traffic that may be passing through our big IP device and get that sent to something like a Splunk or an Elastic Stack or maybe a Kafka if you're doing something very complex from a data processing standpoint? That's what telemetry streaming is focused on. But ultimately, if we look at these different solutions, declarative onboarding, App Services 3, and telemetry streaming as a whole, again, what they're focused on is just managing the life cycle of a big IP device. How do we automate that process in a way that removes a lot of the manual tasks that you're carrying out as an organization today? And again, one of these pieces, AS3, will be a core component of what we talk about a little bit later today, and how Vault integrates with our F5 big IP devices. So going past kind of the F5 piece and going into specifically the HashiCorp components and the HashiCorp stack and what it's focused on. If you look at HashiCorp as an organization, the way that I kind of best visualize it is really kind of what you see in front of you right now, which is ultimately what HashiCorp is about. Is they are 8 different solutions primarily focus on managing the application networking, security, and infrastructure across all your different clouds. How do you make that process not only consistent, but easy and simplified for your organization? So today, we're going to be primarily focused on Vault. But the thing I want to call out just with HashiCorp as a whole is Vault is a single piece of an entire stack that's, again, focused on various different components that probably exist within your clouds or your data centers today. And what's really cool about the HashiCorp stack, just to kind of call things out here, is a lot of these tools closely integrate with each other also. So again, we're going to be very focused on Vault today, and we'll talk a little bit about Terraform as part of our use cases. But the thing I want to call out is Terraform and Vault closely integrate with each other. So Vault, from a security standpoint, being more of a secret store, which we'll touch on in a couple minutes, and Terraform more from an infrastructure management or infrastructure as code standpoint, managing those components. So all these different components of the stack come together very closely, and you can create very large and kind of complex solutions that manage your environments and your clouds using this HashiCorp stack. But ultimately, if you look at these different solutions, what they're focused on is kind of a very simple problem. Well, it's a complex problem, but it's trying to provide a simple solution for that complex problem, which is, if you look at the different clouds that exist out there today, so think about maybe VMware in your own private data center, AWS, Azure, GCP, Oracle, Alibaba, you name it, name your cloud service provider. If you look at these different clouds, each of these different clouds has their own unique APIs and solutions built inside of them. So while these solutions and services might be very similar to each other, every one of these cloud service providers probably has some means of delivering Kubernetes. While it is Kubernetes underneath the covers, the APIs to manage those different solutions is often very different. The way that you're going to manage AWS is going to be probably a little bit different how you're going to manage Azure from a base API standpoint. And the whole goal of really this HashiCorp stack that I just showed a second ago is, again, how do you simplify that? How do you take that complex problem, simplify it, and create a set of solutions, which is those 8 solutions I showed just a moment ago, to make the process of managing those different workloads across applications, networking, security, and infrastructure across those different clouds simplified? How do you make that easier? So when we talk about Vault, It's a question of how do we standardize the way that we manage security across our different clouds. Whether you're on your on-prem VMware environment or whether you're in AWS, it should be the same experience, regardless of where you're managing your security. And the same thing with infrastructure. If I'm on Azure, if I need to build a VM in Azure, if I need to build a VM inside of AWS, that experience should be very similar to each other. So that's kind of the goal of that whole HashiCorp stack. Is ultimately we need to simplify that process. We need to standardize the way that we manage our configurations. And while we're going to be focused purely on the security aspects of that today, the thing I wanted to call out is really all the solutions I just showed a moment ago. All 8 of them are focused on that single use case of how do we simplify the management of our infrastructure, security, networking, and applications across these different areas and across these different clouds. But in addition to that, what's really cool about kind of the HashiCorp stack is it closely integrates with F5 and Nginx today. So Terraform, very kind of infrastructure as code focused tool and probably the most popular infrastructure as code solution out there. Basically focus on how do you take all these different configurations that exist not only within your different clouds, but on your different devices, like your big IP device, and again, standardizing the way that those are communicated. Terraform has an integration with F5 Big IP today, and it has an integration with that automation toolchain I just mentioned a moment ago. So that's one thing, just calling out kind of how HashiCorp stack is kind of integrated with F5 that you can leverage. And then a little bit in a moment or two, we're going to talk about kind of the Vault integration. So from a security standpoint, Vault has integrations with F5 Big IP. So you can certainly use it as a secrets management solution, which we'll hit on in just a moment, but you can also use it for cert generation and cert rotation, which is the primary use case that we're going to focus on today. And again, we'll go a little bit deeper in what that means and how that works in just a moment. But finally, you can also use this thing called Console. And what Console is it's basically a kind of like a service discovery or almost like an application pool management tool to kind of speak in more general terms. But what's really cool about Console is it kind of solves a very common problem with F5 Big IP when they're integrated with each other. And that problem is primarily focused on this idea that applications today are very dynamic in nature. You're going to be scaling in and scaling out these applications constantly. And oftentimes you'll be going through upgrades of these applications as you make changes to them. And often what that means for modern applications is completely spinning up a new set of servers and spinning down the old ones. But the problem you run into with an F5 Big IP is you need a mechanism of updating those pool members that your F5 is probably load balancing or sending traffic to. And the cool thing about Console is you can basically use Console as a means of dynamically populating those pool members. So we're not going to go deep into that use case today, but that is a really cool use case for me that if you're looking at just how the HashiCorp stack integrates with F5 Big IP, I would definitely take a look at that one because that is a incredibly common use case that I see in many organizations that I've worked with in the past. So definitely take a look at kind of these different solutions and how they integrate with F5 Big IP, and then we'll have a link in several minutes that you can go to too that goes through these integrations. So finally, we've talked about the F5 automation toolchain. We've talked a little bit about HashiCorp at large as an organization, but what the heck is this thing Vault about? What is HashiCorp Vault as a solution? What is the value that it can provide when I'm building or managing applications within my organization today? And ultimately, what Vault is focused on is several different things. It really is a feature-rich solution that kind of solves a couple key problems that every organization has. And the first one is really around this idea of secret storage and identity brokering. And what I mean by that is if you think about your organization today, there's probably a lot of secrets out there. There's a lot of database passwords that your applications are using. There's a lot of cloud credentials and service accounts that you personally are probably using and your applications are also using. There's certificates, private keys that we'll hit on later that are also out there that just out in the wild. And you probably need some level of security around those too. And the focus of Vault and the problem that it tries to solve is it wants to act as basically a distributed secure database to store those secrets. It wants to be that centralized mechanism that you can take your database passwords, take your cloud, SaaS, service account credentials. Take your certificate private keys and store it inside of it and ensure that it's secure. And not only that, your applications, your users, you name it, your F5 Big IP can take those secrets and pull them down in a very secure means and mechanisms. So, and that's kind of the identity brokering part, is how do you take those secrets, take those sensitive credentials that you have and pull them down in a way that's secure, and do that in a way that's highly distributed, highly available, and very performant. That's what Vault is focused on. It's that central store for secrets within your organization. Again, we'll touch on just one piece of that today when it comes to certificates. And then the second thing is really kind of focus on is this idea of managing the lifecycle of those secrets. So you've stored your service account credentials, you've stored your database passwords, you've stored your certificates, which again we'll hit on in a moment with our demo. But how do you rotate those secrets? You don't want them to remain static for the rest of the time of the universe. You often need to rotate those secrets, either on your own accord or more realistically, your organization probably has some level of governance or requirements or policies that require you to rotate those secrets. So how do you do that? And that's what Vault is also focused on. So I know for some of us are probably watching this, I would assume even most of us, many of us are probably come from some level of a sysadmin background, maybe an engineering background, where part of our job was rotating those secrets, rotating those database credentials. And for me, I think it was every quarter. There was like a dozen tickets I would get every quarter to rotate database secrets across a long list of applications. And I didn't like it. It wasn't fun. And again, what Vault is focused on is solving that problem. How do you automate the process of not only storing those secrets, but going through the process of rotating those secrets across all of your different applications? So not only are you secure, but you don't have to deal with working, frankly, maintenance windows, hours of maintenance windows to rotate those secrets in a manual way, which is realistically what happens when you're rotating database and service account secrets, speaking from personal experience. So that's the second goal of Vault, is it just automates a process of secrets rotation. It gives you the ability to do that, which is really nice. The third thing is it can basically act as a centralized encryption and decryption point. And what this is ultimately about is you're going to have many different applications within your organization, but you might need to perform some level of encryption and decryption of the data that's passing through those applications. So it could be passwords, it could be social security numbers, it could be credit card numbers. I don't know. It's some level of sensitive information, and you need a means of encrypting that data. Well, what Vault gives you the ability to do is basically take those keys that are used to encrypt that sensitive information and centralize it into a single location, without all the cost and pain of setting up an HSM. So that's another thing with Vault, is you can centralize the encryption and decryption in a single place where you don't have to worry about maybe the keys, the shared keys, or the asymmetric keys for encryption and decryption being sent to all these different locations and keeping track of those. Vault can be that centralized place for managing those keys, which is really nice. And then the final thing, it can act as a PKI secrets engine. And again, this is 4 use cases of what Vault can do as a whole. But as a PKI secrets engine, what this means is Vault can be a certificate authority for your organization, internal certificate authority, where it can, what I mean by CA is it can take a certificate, it can sign it, and then send it to something like an F5 Big IP to use for SSL/TLS traffic for your organization. So that's kind of the final piece. And again, we'll go a little bit deeper into that use case in just a moment. But the final thing is Vault is a super popular solution that's out there. It's probably, if not the most popular open source secrets management solution out there today. You see here 131 million plus yearly downloads. That's quite a bit. But I think that the final 2 things are really the coolest. It is the most popular external Kubernetes secrets engine that's out there. Super popular in the Kubernetes space, and then 70% of the top 20 U.S. banks use it too, which banks are pretty secure. I've worked with quite a bit of them, so if they use Vault, you should take a look at it. It's a great secrets management solution. But which Vault is right for you? So I won't spend a ton of time on this, but the thing I just wanted to call out here is while in this lab, we're going to be very focused on kind of the open source version of Vault. So basically running it locally in this lab environment that we have, which is very similar to what you do if you were to build out your own lab environment. There's many different ways that you can deploy Vault. So that they also have a cloud option called HCP Vault, which gives you the ability to basically deploy Vault at a click of a button, which is really nice. So if you're really lazy and don't want to set up a lab instance of Vault, which is me oftentimes, you can use HCP Vault to spin up your own unique instance of a Vault cluster that's enterprise ready and run some tests against it. Or, maybe you don't trust the cloud, like some people don't. You can use the enterprise version of Vault, which allows you to run basically a full, highly available Vault cluster on-prem to meet your enterprise's needs. So calling that out if you're looking for different ways to deploy Vault. Again, we're going to be focused on just running it locally in a lab machine, as Sean will show in a couple minutes. But ultimately, how does this all come together? So we've talked about F5 and the F5 automation toolchain. We've talked a little bit about kind of Vault, what it is, how does it work, what do you get out of it? But how do we bring these two things together? And there's really kind of 3 or 4 different components that make this thing come together and come alive. And the first one really is our Vault instance itself. So what we'll do in just a moment inside of our lab environment is we will spin up our own instance of HashiCorp Vault that will act as basically our secret store for our certificates, but also our certificate authority. So basically the mechanism that takes a certificate signing request and signs it and basically authenticates, hey, this certificate is real. It came from our organization, our imaginary organization that exists inside this lab environment. And it is an internal CA by default, so it is a certificate authority that's basically isolated specifically to that Vault instance. But the thing I wanted to call out here that's really cool is if you want to use public CAs that are out there today, Vault does integrate with Eventify. So that is a very popular kind of public PKI cert management solution that's out there where you can go to what DigiCert, I think DigiCert's still around, and get a signed certificate from them in a very automated fashion, with Vault being kind of that orchestrator of that action. Or the other one that's really cool is there's also an integration with Let's Encrypt. So I use Let's Encrypt certificates all the time for my different websites that I run. And that's just a easy, free way of getting certificates in an automated fashion. And again, Vault can orchestrate that process and store this in a centralized location. So just kind of calling that out too. I did see a message from the chat. Let me double check really quick what that said. I want to make sure I answer these. So can this be applied for other devices and or applications across your network? So that was the question. So, well, I was about to hit on that, but I'll hit on it right now. So specifically for this Vault use case, it does not have to be F5 big IP. So you do not have to use F5 as the means of running or uploading the certificate and terminating your SSL traffic here. If you want, this could be Nginx. It could be your Tomcat server. It could be anything. So this, the cool thing about this integration of certificate rotation that we're showing off here with Vault is not just limited to F5. You can use it for many other applications in your environment. And the reason why that works is specifically because of this next piece here. So we have Vault. It is our certificate authority, or at least our orchestrator for getting our certificates and automating that process. Now it needs a mechanism of basically configuring that cert to some type of third-party source. So in our case, for this lab today, it's F5 big IP. But again, it could be Nginx if you wanted to. It could be any solution. But the way that that works is it really takes kind of 3 different things. So the first thing that it takes is a cert. So we need, our user here needs to define basically the specifications for our cert. And what this could be is basically things like our SAN, or subject alternative name, the domain that we want to use for our certificate. So something like wwt.com, there's often a domain that's associated with the cert. What's the expiration date for that certificate? We need an expiration date. What is it going to be? other information, organizational information that you commonly see in a cert. Where's your organization based out of? What's the name of the organization? Where are you located? Basically, those are all the different things that you're going to configure as part of this cert piece right here inside of Vault. So when it generates that certificate, it's following a common template and what's being built out as part of that cert. The second thing that we build out is the actual template. And what this is about is basically templatizing the configuration that's going to be applied to this guy here, to AS3. So what's the payload that you either want to send to AS3 or configuration file that you want to upload to Nginx? What does that look like? What does that template look like? That's the second thing that you're going to configure inside of Vault. And it's just a templated file, and Sean may show this a little bit later on and what that looks like. But it's just a JSON payload or a template that is just a file that you're either going to upload to the file system of something like an Nginx, or maybe do like a REST API call, which is what you do to AS3 and what we'll do a little bit later on. And then the final component is the script itself. So this piece right here. And what this is focused on, and this is ultimately what gives Vault the flexibility to carry out its tasks. What this script does is it basically performs the heavy lifting of uploading that certificate to your remote system. So when it comes time to send our certificate to AS3 over a JSON payload using the REST API that AS3 gives you, that script is basically going to structure that payload in a way that AS3 understands using the template that you configured just a moment ago. And then ultimately, the final piece, right, is AS3 will take the payload, the REST API call that you've sent to it, basically telling it, hey, take that old certificate that you had and replace it with this new one that Vault generated. AS3 is going to take that and perform that configuration on your big IP device. And again, the thing I just want to call again with this whole workflow, and back to that question earlier, is doesn't have to be F5 big IP. This is basically the same workflow for something like an Nginx, except you wouldn't have, AS3 here. It'd probably just be Vault communicating directly to Nginx. So it's an incredibly flexible solution that it works in the way that it works. And it's incredibly simple in that there's very few points of failure here. And then the final thing I say is it's incredibly secure, because if we kind of look at this diagram, ultimately there's only two components that see the certificate. It's the Vault instance here and our F5 big IP. No other entity should see this certificate. Yeah, there's some scripts that and processes that each of these systems facilitate, but there's only two entities that see that certificate. And you compare that to maybe doing a certificate rotation on your own. You're either storing that private key in your notepad or your clipboard, I should say, or maybe you're storing on your local file system. For me, that always made me a little bit paranoid. You don't have to worry about any of that when you go through this workflow. It's completely automated, and it kind of removes the risk that your private key is going to get leaked early on in that certificate rotation process. So at a high level, this is how it works. And again, Sean will go through this use case a little bit later in another minute or two, and prove it out in the lab. So what is Sean going to go through as we go through this lab today? It's really three different steps. So what we have done as part of this lab is we have kind of simplified the process of not only spinning up our Vault and Nginx environments that we're going to use as kind of a standard web application, but we've also automated the process of setting up a lot of the templates and scripts I just mentioned a moment ago using GitLab, which is this top guy right here. So we've set up different GitLab workflows or pipelines that basically use Terraform to spin up our Vault and Nginx instances inside of Docker containers. Again, it's very flexible in how you deploy Vault. And the whole reason why we're doing this is, again, to make it a little bit simpler and a bit more expedited in spinning up this lab environment. So we'll have our own Vault instance, and then we'll have Nginx that will act as our web application. So we have something to test our cert against. And then the second thing that we're going to do as part of this workflow, which is this piece right here, is we're going to run a second GitLab workflow that will basically configure Vault with the templates I mentioned a moment ago. So with the AS3 declarations that tell Vault how to configure our F5 big IP with that cert and the script that runs them. And then we'll configure AS3 itself on the big IP to make sure that those API endpoints are available to our Vault instance when it's making calls to our big IP. So that's kind of the second piece. And then finally, behind the scenes, and we'll see this in action, is automatically it'll take those two components. It'll take that Vault and Nginx instance we stood up, and it'll take those configurations we put on top of it, and then it will go through the process of rotating that certificate every 2 minutes. And the thing to call out about this use case in our lab environment is 2 minutes is kind of the extreme use case. We wanted to ensure that everybody who took this lab that goes through it could see the certificates get rotated. But the thing I want to call is that is up to you on what you want the length of life of those certificates. So if you want it to be, a month long, you could do that. If you want it to be 3 months, you could do that. If you want it to be 2 days, you could do that. It's completely up to you. We just decided 2 minutes so you could actually see those certificate rotations in process. So finally, before I kind of hand things over, what I want to call is just a list of resources that you can look at and go through if this use case is interesting to you, or if you're interested in how F5 can integrate with different components of the HashiCorp stack. So this first resource right here is basically just kind of maybe a white page or a whole page just focused on how F5 integrates with the HashiCorp stack. So earlier I had mentioned the Terraform use case and the console use case. If any of those are interesting to you, take a look at that page, and that can be your first step in getting more familiar with those use cases. The second thing is something that we have at WWT. So we have a ton of different labs, on-demand labs that are available to you on our website. And in fact, I'll show it right now. If you go to our main page right now and just look up Terraform F5 as an example, what that will give you access to is our F5 Terraform Automation Lab. And again, this is just another on-demand lab that you have access to with your WWT account that you can launch and go through different F5 Terraform use cases. So I figure I just call this out because, again, this is another very common use case that many organizations are interested in. How do you automate your F5 big IP with Terraform? Well, here's your first step. Here's a lab that kind of gets you started in going through that use case. And then kind of the next two things. So if this Vault use case that we're talking about today, if I can still draw on this, maybe not. Let's try this. Pin. There we go. All right. But these next two, what these are focused on is basically giving credit where credit's due. So a lot of what we're going to show in the lab today, a lot of that code in the article itself that talks about this use case from a F5 Dev Central standpoint is published and easily accessible through these links. So if you want to read the actual article that F5 published around this use case, you can look at that second link of the two. Or if you want to look at the actual code that can be used to deploy this in your own environment, not only is it in our own lab environment that we're going to show off in just a moment, but it's also available through that link. So again, just some great resources if this specific use case is interesting to you. And then finally, I always call this out, especially for HashiCorp stuff. Take the cert if you get the chance. It's $70. It is super cheap. HashiCorp certifications are super cheap. So if Vault interests you, or if Terraform interests you, or Console interests you, take the Vault Associate or Console Associate or Terraform Associate. It'll get you a little bit more familiar with those solutions. And again, it's $70. It's super cheap. So I always encourage people to take advantage of those. But that being said, I'm going to hand things over to Sean. But I will say this, just ensure that if you are going to go through the lab today, make sure you're on this page right here. And that's what Sean will launch into in just a moment. But thank you, everybody. And Sean, do you want to try sharing your screen now? Let me know if you aren't. You aren't able to, I should say.
No problem. Let me get that pulled up for you right now.
Let me know if I have to stop sharing. There we go. Always worry about that stuff.
Okay. Yeah. So before I get started here, I just wanted to go ahead and answer that question in chat about can you deploy this to your environment without without rotating the certificates automatically? And the way that we design this lab is there's going to be two portions. First, we're going to excuse me. First, we're going to deploy everything, And then the second portion is we're going to actually kick off the scripts that will do the actual rotation. So if you don't want these certificates to rotate automatically, you can just skip that second portion. But the first portion will help you deploy everything if that's what you're interested in. So I hope everybody's had a chance to go ahead and pull up this lab page. If not, go ahead and say something in chat and we'll drop the link again. But I'll go ahead and get started. So this first page here, we basically just give an overview of Vault. Tyler just gave a very concise overview of what Vault is, so this is just going to be a rehash of that. This is pretty much a diagram about the workflow that we're going to be going through. And again, we just cover some of the basics about what is the Vault client and what is the Vault agent, which is something that we just went over. But on the next page is where we actually begin the actual deployment. So to do that, go ahead and open up Chrome, and then there will be a GitLab bookmark. The credentials are going to be in the lab guide if you need them, but the password is also there as well. Let me just go ahead and find that for you. So here's the login root and the password. We've only got one project here, which is going to be the F5 certificate rotate. So once you get logged in, these are going to be the files that you see here. And to address that first question more specifically, I'll go ahead and open up GitLab ci.yaml real quick, which is going to be the configuration file that drives the CI/CD pipeline that we're going to be executing in just a moment. So here there's a couple of steps: deploy Vault, update Vault, and destroy Big IP and destroy Vault. The last two are really optional. There's just a way to clean up the lab if you want to clean it up, but it gets cleaned up automatically at the end anyways. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to deploy Vault, and then we're going to see what that actually looks like, and then we're going to kick off the job that will update Vault, and we're going to watch the demo application actually have a certificate that expires and then gets refreshed automatically. So that's a pretty cool use case. So in order to do that, we just open up Chrome, go to GitLab, which we just did. Another thing that I want to note really quick is in this instance, since this is a dev environment, we're just going to be using the dev server of Vault. But if you're going to be running this in a production environment, you're going to want to run the production version. So in order to kick off the CI/CD pipeline, you just navigate to this little rocket ship icon here and then click on pipelines. And then it's usually in the top right corner, but because of the screen size here, it's kind of in the middle. But you just click on Run Pipeline. And in this first box here, we're going to type mode, all uppercase. And in the second box, deploy, all lowercase. And then we just click on Run Pipeline. And in the background, what Terraform is going to do is it's going to spin up a couple of Docker containers on our Ubuntu server. So there's going to be one Vault container and there's going to be one Nginx container. And this is basically just going to prepare the infrastructure for us. This isn't actually going to do any certificate rotation. But it only takes about a moment to complete. I'll go ahead and open up here so you can see the output. Right now, it's just initializing Terraform. And currently it's grabbing the Docker containers and it's building that out right now. And the job was successful. So in this lab, as part of the output, we just have, just to make everything easier for you, we've got the F5 URL, we've got the Vault URL, and we also provide the login password for F5 as well, just so that you can find it easily. But this should all be included in the lab documents as well. Let me go ahead and pull up Terminal real quick so I can show you what that did for us. So to log into the Docker terminal here, which I'm about to do, you just log in with the username Ubuntu, UBUNTU, and the password is exactly the same, too. And just to confirm that everything is up and running, we issued the Docker PS command. And here you can see that we have our Nginx demo application, which has been up for about a minute, and also our Vault container, which has been up for about a minute. This other container is just being used for DNS so that we can route everything using a domain name. And I'll go ahead and scroll down a little bit. So we've seen the deploy. The pipeline generates an AS3 JSON payload, which has not been pushed to Big IP yet, but if we kick off the second pipeline, it will be pushed to Big IP. So let's go ahead and do that right now. So in order to do that, we just go back to the GitLab instance here. We click on the little rocket ship icon, go to pipelines, and click on run pipeline. And then this time we type mode, all uppercase. And then instead of typing deploy, we just type update. So update. And then click run pipeline. So what this is going to do in the background, and it's already completed, it's going to issue a couple of commands to our Docker container. And this is where you would insert the notification for the admin if you didn't want it to automatically rotate the certs for you. You see right here, we're executing a script called rotatesearch.sh. If you didn't want them to rotate automatically, you would just cut that part out. So hopefully that answers your question. And before we take a look at the demo application, we can go ahead and take a look at the configuration in Big IP real quick. And to log in here, just go ahead and click on the Big IP icon bookmark, and we log in with admin as the username and password. And this does a number of things, but in order to basically see the virtual server list, what you would do is click on local traffic, virtual servers, and then go down to virtual server list, which brings up another point. Yes, it's mentioned right here. So what you would have to do in order to see it is in the top right corner where it says partition, click that drop down arrow and then go to demo F5. Otherwise, you're not going to see anything. So this is what was just created using that F5 automation toolchain. And we can see that in our demo application by clicking on the demo icon. And you are going to get a warning here because we are using a self-signed certificate. But there are other methods where you can generate the certificates that are not self-signed. And as an example here, I'll go ahead and view the certificate. Once we have this page open, if you click on details, just scroll. We actually have to scroll. You can click on valid to see when it expires. So at 1:49:56, which is in about 20 seconds from now, that certificate will expire. And there's going to be a shell script running in the background on the Vault Docker container that automatically looks for a new template file to push to Big IP. So once this certificate is expired, Big IP should already have a new certificate to replace it with. So now my time is 150. There might be a little bit of delay for you, but this certificate should already be expired right now. In order to refresh the browser and force a cache refresh, you have to do Shift F5. If you just refresh the page, you're not going to get, it's going to use the cached version. So without clearing your history, the best way that you can refresh the cache is Shift F5. So now that we've done that, if we look at that certificate again, it's going to have a different valid to date. So this one is now 152, where previously it was 150. So this certificate has successfully been rotated. And it will continue to rotate every 2 minutes. And as Tyler had mentioned before, this is just an extreme use case. You don't have to rotate your certificates every 2 minutes. It could be every 2 months or 2 years or whatever your organization's policy is. It could even be every 2 seconds if you wanted. But yeah, so this application will continue to run in the background, and every 2 minutes that certificate will be updated.
Yeah, I don't know if we want to do every 2 seconds, although you could do that.
Yeah.
I think it would annoy somebody or break something.
Right. Very extreme.
But it is really cool that it gives you the flexibility like that. It's really neat.
Well, I just wanted to mention one more time that this project was a fork of an existing F5 GitHub repository, which is linked in the slides. So if you had any questions or you want to see the changes, now would be a great time to actually go over, I guess, some of the stuff that are going on behind the scenes. So let me go ahead and show you real quick. So we've got a couple of directories here, and the first one, this Ansible Big IP directory, that's mostly just used to tear everything down. We didn't actually use Ansible in the 2 CI/CD pipelines that we just kicked off. But if you were to run that pipeline again with mode destroy, it would call the Ansible script in here, and it would just destroy everything that we just created. So if you needed a way to clean things up, this would be a great way to do that.
Cool stuff.
And, sorry, what's that?
No, cool stuff.
Yeah. So Terraform tfrs.cert, this is eventually going to become a shell script. It has a while loop built into it that rotates the cert about every 30 seconds. So basically, these 2 files are templates, and they get generated into the actual certificate and the script on the server. And another thing I want to cover real quick is the GitLab ci.yaml file. So if you're going to use a production server, in this instance, we're using a dev server. You're going to want to grab the vault token from your Docker logs. Currently, that can't be done with Terraform. There's a bug that it's open on the GitHub repository for Terraform. So if you wanted to read the actual Docker logs, you wouldn't be able to do that with Terraform. You would actually have to create another stage similar to this right here. So instead of cd temp and then run the script, you would just issue a grep command, for example. So that would be one way you can grab the token if you're going to stand up a production instance. And let's take a look at the lab one more time.
Are we going to have a new cert? Let's see.
Yeah, this is the real test.
Yeah, and the thing I would say too, just around the GitLab CI file that you just showed a second ago, Sean, is If you're looking to build out this process in your own environment, kind of all the documentation on the steps that were automated within that GitLab CI file. So while yeah, it was very automated in nature, a lot of the complexities of the individual commands that you run were abstracted away using GitLab, as Sean just showed. Ultimately, you can see those individual commands in that GitLab CI file. So everything's there. There's no secrets. There's no secret sauce there. It's the magic is there. So that's completely open to all of you. Sean, is there anything else that you wanted to hit on as part of this?
No, I think we've covered everything. If anybody's interested in the code, feel free to go ahead and download it. You can download that to your desktop and take a look at it if you'd like.
Perfect. And I don't think we have any other questions in the chat, but Maggie, do you want to close us out?
Yes. Thank you again, Sean and Tyler, for leading us through this workshop today, and for everyone who was able to join. Please do not hesitate to reach out and ask us questions, and we